Brothers and sisters in Islam, peace be upon you, this is Salim bin Mohammed Rafi. I am bringing to you the highlights of the Holy Quran along with historic background under which various ayats were revealed and added in different surahs by our Holy Prophet, peace be upon him. The reason this is given separately is to make this information available to the serious student who wishes to understand depth of the words of Allah Subhanahu revealed for the benefit of whole mankind through our Holy Prophet Muhammad Mustafa, peace be upon him. Sit back, relax and listen now. 20th Para. The 20th Para or Juz of the Quran is Aman Kalak, which has 3 surahs. The first one is Surah Al-Naml 27, Ayat 60 to 93, Al-Qasas 28, Ayat 1 to 88, and Surah Al-Ankabut 29, Ayat 1 to 44. Total no of ayat in this para, 166. Highlights of Part 20. Part 20 of the Holy Quran. There are 3 parts in this para: Surah Naml, Surah Qasas, and Surah Ankabut. Surah Naml. There are 2 things in the remaining part of Surah Naml. 5 evidences of oneness. He is the only creator of the sky, the rain, and the fields. He runs the system of the land, canals, mountains, and oceans. No one else besides him hears the cries of helpless, powerless, and the sick. He shows the way in the darkness of the sea and land. He maneuvers the system of air, and he created us the first time, and he will also resurrect us the second time. He is the provider of our sustenance. Day of Judgment. A trumpet will be played which will mark the end of the world on the Day of Judgment. The mountains will fly in the sky like clouds, the gathering of everyone on the Day of Resurrection. The pious people will be rewarded for their good deeds and evil people will be punished for what they did. The basic theme of Surah Al-Qasas is prophethood. Some aspects of the life of Prophet Moses are mentioned to show the similarity between him and Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon all the prophets of Allah. There are also answers here to the questions and doubts that were raised by some non-believers. There are 2 things in Surah Qasas: the detailed story of Hazrat Musa, peace be upon him, and Pharaoh, and story of Hazrat Musa, peace be upon him, and Karun. Surah Al-Ankabut reminds the believers to be strong in their faith and not to give up their faith because of hardship or family pressures. Stories of previous prophets and their followers are also mentioned here to show that the path of truth is not an easy path. It has trials and hardships. There are 3 things in the beginning of Surah Ankabut. Oneness. The idols of the idol worshippers is as weak as the web of a spider. Prophethood. Allah certainly sends us through trials. In this regard some stories of prophets are mentioned. Mention of the Day of Judgment. The contrast between the Tawhid and Shirk. Allah or the so-called gods of Shirk, the surety of resurrection, the coming of the Day of Judgment. Story of Moses and Pharaoh is related. Pharaoh was persecuting the Israelites. Allah wished to show his favor to the oppressed people. Birth of Moses and then his growing up in Pharaoh's own palace, Moses' encounter with an Egyptian and his escape to Madian, Moses' marriage in Madian, Moses receives prophethood and especial signs from Allah. His appearance before Pharaoh. Pharaoh's denial and then Allah's punishment for him and his armies, the Prophet relating these stories by inspiration from Allah and for a purpose. Allah's guidance is continues, the message of Islam is Tawhid, the story of Quran, his character and his end, Allah's promise for the believers. Tests and trials are part of faith. Examples of prophets Noah and Ibrahim, example of Prophet Lot and example of Prophet Shu'aib. References to the people of Ad, Thamud, Quran, and Pharaoh. Message of Prophet Moses. Spider web of shirk. Historic background. Surah An-Naml. Ayah's revelation place 93 Makkah. Name. The surah takes its name from the phrase Wadin Naml, which occurs in verse 18, implying that it is a surah in which the story of An-Naml, the ant, has been related. Period of revelation. The subject matter and the style bear full resemblance with the surahs of the Middle Maccan period, and this is supported by traditions as well. According to Ibn Abbas and Jabir bin Zayd, first the surah Ash-Shu-Ara was sent down, then the surah An-Naml, and then Al-Qasas. Theme and topics. The surah consists of two discourses, the first from the beginning of the surah to the end of verse 58, and the second from verse 59 to the end of the surah. The theme of the first discourse is that only those people can benefit from the guidance of the Quran and become worthy of the good promises made in it, who accept the realities which this book presents as the basic realities of the universe, and then follow up their belief with obedience and submission in their practical lives as well. But the greatest hindrance for man to follow this way is the denial of the hereafter. For it makes him irresponsible, selfish, and given to worldly life, which in turn makes it impossible for him to submit himself before God and to accept the moral restrictions on his lusts and desires. After this introduction, three types of character have been presented. The first type is characterized by Pharaoh and the chiefs of Thamud and the rebels of the people of Lot, who were all heedless of the accountability of the hereafter and had consequently become the slaves of the world. These people did not believe even after seeing the miracles. Rather, they turned against those who invited them to goodness and piety. They persisted in their evil ways, which are held in abhorrence by every sensible person. They did not heed the admonition even until a moment before they were overtaken by the scourge of Allah. The second type of character is of the Prophet Solomon, peace be upon him, who had been blessed by God with wealth and kingdom and grandeur to an extent undreamed of by the chiefs of the disbelievers of Makkah. But, since he regarded himself as answerable before God and had the feeling that whatever he had was only due to Allah's bounty, he had adopted the attitude of obedience before him, and there was no tinge of vanity in his character. The third type is of the Queen of Sheba, who ruled over a most wealthy and well-known people in the history of Arabia. She possessed all those means of life, which could cause a person to become vain and conceited. Her wealth and possessions far exceeded the wealth and possessions of the Quraysh. Then she professed shirk, which was not only an ancestral way of life with her, but she had to follow it in order to maintain her position as a ruler. Therefore, it was much more difficult for her to give up shirk and adopt the way of Tawhid than it could be for a common mushrik. But when the truth became evident to her, nothing could stop her from accepting it. Her deviation was, in fact, due to her being born and brought up in a polytheistic environment and not because of her being a slave to her lusts and desires. Her conscience was not devoid of the sense of accountability before God. In the second discourse, at the outset, attention has been drawn to some of the most glaring and visible realities of the universe, and the disbelievers of Makkah have been asked one question after the other to the effect, do these realities testify to the creed of shirk which you are following, or to the truth of Tawhid to which the Quran invites you? After this, the real malady of the disbelievers has been pointed out, saying, the thing which has blinded them and made them insensitive to every glaring reality is their denial of the hereafter. This same thing has rendered every matter and affair of life non-serious for them. For, when according to them, everything has to become dust ultimately, and the whole struggle of life is purposeless and without an object before it, the truth and falsehood are equal and alike. Therefore, the question whether one's system of life is based on the right or wrong foundations, becomes meaningless for him. But the discourse, as outlined above, is not meant to dissuade the Prophet and the Muslims from calling the obdurate and heedless people to the way of Tawhid. It is, in fact, intended to arouse them from their slumber. That is why in verses 67 to 93 certain things have been said repeatedly in order to produce in the people a sense of the hereafter, to warn them of the consequences of being heedless of it, and to convince them of its coining, like an eyewitness of something, who convinces the other person of it, who has not seen it? In conclusion, the real invitation of the Quran, that is, the invitation to serve one Allah alone, has been presented in a concise but forceful manner, and the people warned that accepting it would be to their own advantage and rejecting it to their own disadvantage. For if they deferred their faith until they saw those signs of God, after the appearance of which they would be left with no choice but to believe and submit, they should bear in mind the fact that that would be the time of judgment, and believing then would be of no avail. Surah Al-Qasas. Ayah's revelation place 88 Makkah. Name. The surah takes its name from verse 25, in which the word Al-Qasas occurs. Lexically, Qasas means to relate events in their proper sequence. Thus, from the viewpoint of the meaning too, this word can be a suitable title for the surah, for in it the detailed story of the prophet Moses has been related. Period of revelation. As already mentioned in the introduction to Surah An-Naml, according to Ibn Abbas and Jabir bin Zayd, Surahs Ash-Shu-Ara, An-Naml and Al-Qasas were sent down one after the other. The language, the style, and the theme also show that the period of the revelation of these three surahs is nearly the same. Another reason for their loose resemblance is that the different parts of the prophet Moses' story as mentioned in these surahs together make up a complete story. In Surah Ash-Shu-Ara, excusing himself for not accepting the office of prophethood, the prophet Moses submits, "The people of Pharaoh have the charge of a crime against me, therefore, I fear that they will put me to death." Then, when Lai goes before Pharaoh, the latter says, "Did we not bring you up as a child in our house? You lived quite a few years of your life among us, and then you did what you did." Nothing more of this has been mentioned there, but in this surah the other details have been supplied. Similarly, in Surah An-Naml the story starts abruptly from the time when the prophet Moses was journeying with his family and suddenly saw a fire at a distance. In that surah nothing has been said about the nature of his journey, or the place he was coming from, or his destination, but this surah supplies all the necessary details. Thus, the three surahs read together complete the story of the prophet Moses, Allah's peace be upon him. Theme and topics. The main theme is to remove the doubts and objections that were being raised against the prophethood of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be Allah's peace and blessings, and to invalidate the excuses which were being offered for not believing in him. For this purpose, first the story of the prophet Moses has been related, which, by analogy with the period of revelation, impresses the following points in the listener's mind automatically. First, Allah provides the means and motives of whatever He wills to do, in imperceptible ways. Thus, Allah so arranged things that the child through whom Pharaoh had to be removed from power, was bred and brought up in his own house, and he could not know whom he was fostering. Who can then fight God and frustrate him by his machinations? Secondly, prophethood is not granted to a person amid festivities by issuing a proclamation from the earth and heavens. You wonder how Muhammad, upon whom be Allah's peace, has been blessed with prophethood unexpectedly, all of a sudden, but Moses, whom you yourselves acknowledge as a prophet, v. 48, had also become a prophet unexpectedly, while on a journey, and nobody had known what event had occurred in the desolation at the foot of Mt. Sinai. Even Moses himself did not know a moment before what he was going to be blessed with. He, in fact, had gone to bring a piece of the fire but had returned with the gift of prophethood. Thirdly, the person from whom Allah wants to take some service comes out without any army and armor and without an apparent helper or force at his back, yet he puts to rout much stronger and better equipped opponents. The contrast that existed between the strengths of Moses, peace be upon him, and Pharaoh was much more prominent and glaring than that which existed between Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the Quraysh, yet the world knows who had come out victorious in the end and who had been routed. Fourthly, you refer to Moses again and again and say, why has Muhammad not been given the same which was given to Moses? I.e. miracles of the staff, the shining hand, etc., as if to suggest that you would readily believe only if you were shown the kind of the miracles that were shown by Moses to Pharaoh. But do you know what sort of response was made by those who were shown those miracles? They had not believed even after seeing the miracles, and had only said, "This is magic," for they were involved in stubbornness and hostility to the truth. The same malady afflicts you today. Will you believe only when you are slowly the same kind of miracles? Then, do you know what fate the disbelievers had met even after seeing the miracles? They were annihilated by Allah. Do you now wish to meet the same doom by asking for the miracles in your obstinacy? These were the things which were automatically impressed in the mind of every listener who heard this story in the pagan environment of Mecca, for a similar conflict was going on at that time between the Holy Prophet and disbelievers of Mecca, as had already taken place between the Prophet Moses and Pharaoh before. This was the background against which the story of the Prophet Moses was narrated, so that a perfect analogy was established automatically in every detail between the conditions prevailing then in Mecca and those existing in the time of the Prophet Moses. Then, from verse 43 onward, the discourse turns to the real theme. In the first place, the narration of a 2,000-year-old historical event by the Holy Prophet with such accuracy and detail, is presented as a proof of his prophethood, although he was unlettered and the people of his city and clan knew full well that he had no access to any source of such information as they could point out. Then the disbelievers of Mecca have been warned and put to shame for an event that occurred in those very days. Some Christians had come to Mecca and embraced Islam when they heard the Quran from the Holy Prophet. Instead of learning any lesson from this, the Makkans were so upset at this that their leader, Abu Yal, disgraced those people publicly. In conclusion, the excuse that the disbelievers put forward for not believing in the Holy Prophet has been dealt with. What they feared was this: if we give up the polytheistic creed of the Arabs and accept the doctrine of Tawhid instead, this will put an end to our supremacy in the religious, political, and economic fields, which, in turn, will destroy our position of the most influential tribe of Arabia, and we shall be left with no refuge anywhere in the land. As this was the real motive of the chiefs of the Quraysh for their antagonism towards the truth, and their doubts and objections were only the pretenses, which they invented to deceive the common people, Allah has dealt with these fully till the end of the surah, considered each aspect of these in a wise manner, and offered the remedy for their basic ailment, due to which those people judged the truth and falsehood only from the viewpoint of their worldly interests. Surah Al-Ankabut. Ayah's Revelation, place 69, Makkah. Name. The surah takes its name from verse 41, in which the word Ankabut, spider, has occurred. Period of revelation. Verses 56 to 60 clearly show that the surah was sent down a little before the migration to Habash, and this is supported by the internal evidence of the subject matter as well. Some commentators have opined that since it mentions the hypocrites, and hypocrisy appeared in Medina, the first 10 verses of the surah were revealed at Medina and the rest of it at Mecca, whereas the people whose hypocrisy has been mentioned here are those who had adopted a hypocritical way of life because they were afraid of the oppression and extreme physical torture to which the Muslims were being subjected by the disbelievers. Evidently, this kind of hypocrisy could be there only at Mecca and not at Medina. Similarly, some other commentators, seeing that in the surah the Muslims have been exhorted to migrate, have regarded it as the last surah to be revealed at Mecca, whereas the Muslims had migrated to Habash even before their migration to Medina. These opinions are not based on any tradition but on the internal evidence of the subject matter, and this internal evidence, when considered against the subject matter of the surah as a whole, points to the conditions prevailing in the time of the migration to Habash and not to the last stage at Mecca. Theme and subject matter. A perusal of the surah shows that the period of its revelation was the period of extreme persecution of the Muslims at Mecca. The disbelievers were opposing and fighting Islam tooth and nail, and the new converts were being subjected to the severest oppression. Such were the conditions when Allah sent down this surah to strengthen and encourage the sincere Muslims as well as to put to shame those who were showing weakness of the faith. Besides, the disbelievers of Mecca have been threatened and warned not to invite for themselves the fate that the antagonists of the truth have been experiencing in every age. In this connection, the questions that some young men answered. For instance, their parents were urging them to abandon Muhammad, may Allah's peace be upon him, and return to their ancestral religion, for they argued, the Quran in which you have put your faith, regards the rights of the parents as the uppermost, therefore, listen to what we say, otherwise you will be working against the dictates of your own faith. This has been answered in verse 8. Similarly, the people of some clans said to the new converts to Islam, "Leave the question of punishments, etc., to us. Listen to us and abandon this man. If God seizes you in the hereafter, we will come forward and say, Lord, these people are innocent, we had forced them to give up the faith, therefore, seize us." This has been dealt with, in verses 12 to 13. The stories mentioned in the surah also impress the same point mostly, as if to say, look at the prophets of the past, they were made to suffer great hardships and were treated cruelly for long periods. Then, at last they were helped by Allah. Therefore, take heart, Allah's succor will certainly come. But a period of trial and tribulation has to be undergone. Besides teaching this lesson to the Muslims, the disbelievers also have been warned, as if to say, if you are not being immediately seized by Allah, you should not form the wrong impression that you will never be seized. The signs of the doomed nations of the past are before you. Just see how they met their doom and how Allah succored the prophets. Then the Muslims have been instructed to the effect, if you feel that the persecution has become unbearable for you, you should give up your homes, instead of giving up your faith. Allah's earth is vast, seek a new place where you can worship Allah with the full peace of mind. Besides all this, the disbelievers also have been urged to understand Islam. The realities of Tawhid and the hereafter have been impressed with rational arguments, shirk have been refuted, and drawing their attention towards the signs in the universe, they have been told that all these signs confirm the teachings that the Prophet is presenting before them.